and join with me in the prayer of illumination. Living God, help us to hear your word, that we may truly understand, that understanding we may believe, and believing we may follow your ways in all faithfulness, seeking your honor and glory in all that we do. Amen. Our scripture reading this morning is from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 24. But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field. One will be taken and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together. One will be taken and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, you know, Christmas season is all about the music. I don't think there's a time of year where there's more music than there is at Christmas time. So, let's do another song. This one is Santa Claus is coming to town. You ready to join me? Here we go. You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. He's making a list and checking it twice. Gonna find out who's naughty or nice. Santa Claus is coming to town. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. Oh, you better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. Oh, you guys are great. Well, a few years ago, the BC comic strip had a Christmas cartoon that read like this. One small ant said to his father, "Dad, who is Jesus?" The father ant replied, "He's the reason for the season." In the next panel, the small ant says, "But Dad, I thought Santa Claus was the reason." And the father replies, "He is, if you prefer Nintendo to everlasting life." Let us pray. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, Thanksgiving is over, and now we are on the move to Christmas. And there is a contest going on. It's Jesus versus Santa Claus. You know, for years I have sung that song, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and this week it kind of had an epiphany. It kind of hit me like that. You know, in the song, children are told to watch out. Don't cry. Don't pout. Be good. Be nice. Why? Because the all-knowing, all-seeing Santa Claus is coming to town. The song is about the advent of Santa Claus. Now, I know it's a cliche, but Jesus is the reason for the season. Yet many folk, including many Christians, will spend more time and energy in the next 28 days getting ready for Santa Claus type Christmas than they will spend getting ready for Jesus. Today is the beginning of a new liturgical year. It is the first Sunday of Advent. That's why it's all purple. And Advent means coming, the coming of Christ. You know, it's interesting that in the lectionary for the first Sunday of Advent, it doesn't begin the season with the cute, cuddly Jesus story of him being born in a manger. It starts at the end of the story. Not in his first coming, but his second coming, when Christ will return on the clouds to judge the hearts of men and women and to restore all things to himself. So today it's no angels and shepherds, but destruction and separation. It's not a very cheery image for Christmas time. But you know, Christmas is not about holly, eggnog, and poinsettias. Christmas is serious business. Today's reading falls in the larger context of chapters 24 and 25. Chapter 24 begins with the disciples and Jesus are outside the temple, and the disciples are in awe of the temple because it was a stunning, magnificent piece of architecture. And Jesus says to them, guys, there is a day coming when there will not be one stone left on top of another. And indeed, that happens in 70 AD. But he tells them the temple will be no more. And the disciples, they turn to Jesus and they say to Jesus, well, when will this happen? What will be a sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Jesus responds in the first part of chapter 4 by telling them that there will be false prophets that will lead the people astray, that there will be wars and rumors of wars, earthquakes and famine and persecution. And then the Son of Man will appear on the clouds with a trumpet blast and gather all the elect together. But then Jesus says, as to when this will occur, he says, the hour and the day are not known, not even by the angels or the Son of Man. And some people go, wait a minute, Jesus didn't know? And that is what he says here. But you know, Jesus is not denying his divinity here. He is still God. In Paul's letter to the Philippians, Paul writes, in speaking of Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in human likeness, and being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. The mystery of our faith is that Jesus was fully God and fully human, and that in the time Jesus chose to set aside the glory and privileges of his deity to take on our human form, to live then by faith and obedience, and giving us such an example. So as Jesus is telling his disciples only the Father knows, that is the context. That in this time and space, that only the Father knew the hour and the day. And it's really interesting as you look through the history, there have been a lot of people over time that just don't take Jesus at his word. Hippolytus, who was a philosopher back in the early centuries, and he decided that the end of the world, Jesus' coming, would be 500 AD. A German theologian by the name of Bernhard Thuringia, he said 992 AD. In the 16th century, Martin Luther wrote, we have reached the time of the white horse of the apocalypse. This world can last no longer. Christopher Columbus measured in on this. He said it would be 1556 AD. I was trying to remember when he came to America. That was after that. So I was doing the little ditty in my head. 1874, Charles Russell, founder of Jehovah's Witness, concluded that Christ had already returned, but that people would have another 40 years of grace. But then when 1914 came along, the denomination had to change their timetable. Today there are preachers who will tell you that the day and time is upon us now. You may even know people who will tell you they, quote, see the signs. Friends, I'm going to tell you this is utter foolishness. Jesus said we will not know when. But he does make it clear it will be unexpected. And so he offers these vignettes that illustrate his point. First, he talks about the days of Noah, and people are eating and drinking and getting married. They're just living carefree, clueless lives until the flood comes and takes them all away. In the second one, Jesus is speaking of men working in a field, and one is taken and one is left. And then of two women who are grinding meal together, and one is taken and one is left. You know, Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins made millions off of that image in their Left Behind series, which I will tell you was long on science fiction and very short on theology. Jesus is not talking about a rapture here. He is speaking about his advent, his coming again. It will happen when we're doing just ordinary, everyday things. We could be watching our favorite ball team, taking a walk, playing cards with friends, decorating our Christmas tree, putting our manger scene on the mantle. Jesus is saying, my return will be unexpected. And then he goes on to talk about a thief that comes in the night. You know, no thief will dial you up on the phone and tell you the date and time they're coming to your house, because then we would be ready for it. But the thief slips in and out without us ever knowing. You know, it's kind of like the children's game, hide and go seek. You know, that person's it, and they're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, ready or not, here I come. That's what Jesus is saying. Ready or not, I'm coming. So what are we to do? Jesus says, keep watch. Keep alert, stay vigilant. And then he offers 3 more parables that are contained in chapter 25. The first one is the parable of the 10 virgins. We have 5 very wise ones and 5 foolish ones. Now, in Western weddings, it's all about the bride. But back in Jesus' day, the emphasis was on the groom. On the wedding day, the groom would go to the bride's house for the celebration, and then after the wedding ceremony itself, the bride and the groom would do this long procession, and people in town would all gather together, and they would go down to the groom's house for a feast that oftentimes would last a week. In the parable, you know, I think dads nowadays are worried about the one-day wedding. And how about a week? All week. So in the parable of the 10 virgins, these 10 virgins are waiting to join the procession as it goes along. They're hoping to take part in the wedding banquet. But when the groom does not arrive at the expected time, 5 of them run out of oil. They attempt to borrow oil from the other 5, but the other 5 are holding their oil because they don't want to be left unprepared. So these other 5 foolish ones have to go buy oil, and while they're gone, the groom passes by, and they miss out on the banquet. When Jesus returns to take his people to heaven, we must be ready. Our lamp of faith must be still burning, stoked by the oil of our relationship with Christ, cultivated daily through prayer and worship, study, and service. Such spiritual oil cannot be borrowed. We have to keep watch. In the second parable, it's the parable of the talents. I'm sure we've all heard the parable of the talents. And I will tell you, one of my pet peeves is when preachers use this parable during a financial stewardship campaign. That's not the context. That's not what Jesus is talking about here. He talks about a master who's about to go away. Jesus is about to go away. And so he leaves his servants in charge of his possessions. He gives 5 talents to one, 2 talents to another, and 1 to the third. When he returned in the story, he goes to the first servant. The first servant says here, the first servant has doubled, now has 10 talents. And of course, we know what the master says, well done, good and faithful servant. And then we have the second servant with 2 talents who also doubled them. And again, well done, good and faithful servant. But that third one was afraid. And the third one held it to himself, didn't even invest it in the bank, did nothing but bury it. And we know what the Lord said to that one, you wicked slave. And then he had to go to that terrible weeping and gnashing of teeth place. The point is that we have been given by God spiritual and material blessing. Keeping watch means that we use those blessings in a manner that glorifies God and builds up God's kingdom here on earth. Because when Christ does return, we will give an account with what we have done with all that God has given us. And in the last parable, it's the separation of the sheep and the goats. Again, we know that story. On the one side, we have those that are to the right. Jesus says, I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was hungry and you gave me food. I was sick and imprisoned and you visited me. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And they say, well, Jesus, when did we do that? And he said, when you did it to the least of these, you did it unto me. And then he turns to the ones on the left and he says, when I was naked, you did not clothe me. When I was hungry, you did not feed me. When I was sick and imprisoned, you did not visit me. And when I was a stranger, you did not welcome me. And they said, well, when did we not do that? And Jesus says, when you did not do it to the least of these, you did not do it to me. I love in Tolstoy's Martin the Cobbler, he catches this parable really well. It's a story of a lonely shoemaker who is promised in a dream that Christ will come to visit his shop. The next day, Martin rises early in the morning, gets his shop all ready, prepares meals, and then he waits. The only one who showed up in the morning was an old beggar who came asking for rest, and Martin gave him the room that he had prepared for his divine guest. The only one to show up in the afternoon was an old lady with a heavy load of wood. She was hungry and asked for food, and he gave her the food that he had prepared for the divine guest. In the evening, a lost boy wandered by. Martin took him home, afraid all the while that he would miss the Christ. That night in his prayers, he asked the Lord, where were you? I waited all day for you. And the Lord said to Martin, 3 times I came to your friendly door. 3 times my shadow was on your floor. I was a beggar with bruised feet. I was the woman you gave to eat. I was the child on the homeless street. Keep watch, because Jesus is closer than we think, because every time we receive or help someone, we do it to him. So Jesus, in responding to his disciples, is unconcerned about what will happen in the future and when it will happen. He is more concerned with how they live in the present time, keeping watch, living faithfully, keeping their lamp burning, using all that God has given them to increase the kingdom, and caring for the least of these in his name. The season of Advent is a time of reflection. Christmas is serious business, and it matters how we respond to Jesus and how we live while there is still time. St. Francis was hoeing in his garden one day, and a philosopher friend approached him and said, what would you do if you learned you would die before the sun sets? St. Francis reflected for a moment and replied, I would finish hoeing my garden. Bonhoeffer was asked by critics, why do you expose yourself to all this danger? Jesus will return any day, and all your work and suffering will be for nothing. Bonhoeffer responded, if Jesus returns tomorrow, then tomorrow I will rest from my labors. But today I have work to do. I must continue the struggle until I am finished. And John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, was asked one day, what would you do if the Lord was coming tomorrow? He answered, I would get a good night's sleep and wake up in the morning and go on with my work, for I would want him to find me doing what he had appointed me to do. When we all hear one more rendition of Santa Claus is Coming to Town from our radios or over the department store intercom, we need to remember Jesus' reminder that Christmas is serious business. There's this story that is really sweet. There's a little girl named Jana. She was having a part in the Christmas drama at her church, very excited about her part, so excited that her mother thought that she was going to be one of the main characters. But Jana, however, would not tell what the part was. So after all the anticipation, the night came, and the parents eagerly awaiting the pageant. One by one, the children took their places, the shepherds in a corner of the stage, Mary and Joseph standing solemnly behind the manger. In the back were 3 wise men waiting impatiently. Meanwhile, Jana sat quietly and confidently. The teacher began, a long time ago, Mary and Joseph had a baby, and they named him Jesus. And when Jesus was born, a bright star appeared over the stable, and this was Jana's clue. She got up from her chair, picked up a tinfoil star, and walked behind Mary and Joseph. and held the star up high for everyone to see. When the teacher told the shepherds to come in to see the baby, the 3 young shepherds came forward, and Jana jiggled her star up and down excitedly. The children were to come. When the wise men responded to their cue, Jana went forward a little ways to meet them and lead them, her face as bright as the real star would have been. And then the play ended. They had refreshments, and on the way home, even though she had a non-speaking part, Jana said to her mother with great satisfaction, "I had the main part." "You did?" her mother asked, wondering what she was thinking. She said, "Yes, because I showed everybody how to find Jesus." The contest is on. Santa Claus versus Jesus. Many people, including Christians, will spend the next 28 days getting ready for the advent of Santa Claus. But let's be different. Jesus is coming. Let us be watchful, tending to the least of these in his name by giving food to the homeless, clothing to the cold and naked, a toy to a needy child, visiting the sick and lonely and homebound. Let us multiply the gifts God has given us, forgiving a past hurt, extending grace to the driver who cuts us off, comfort to those who grieve, hope to someone in despair. And let us keep our lamp burning. Let us be excited like Jana. Let us show everyone this season how to find Jesus, because that, my friends, is the reason for the season. Thanks be to God. Amen. Let us stand with O Little Town of Bethlehem, number 2.